That takes care of the announcements. Let's look at Psalm 63 together. I've entitled this morning's message, A Renewed Intimacy with God. It's a longer title than I normally have, but I couldn't find a way to shorten it down. There are two aspects of the psalmist's heart that is being expressed here. It's a psalm of David when he's in the wilderness of Judah. They're not really sure. We don't really know exactly. This is the subscript in Hebrew that's actually given. It was while he was in the wilderness of Judah, whether it was when he was running from his son Absalom, who wanted to kill him and take his throne away from him, or whether it was when he was running from King Saul, his father-in-law. We're not really sure exactly when it takes place, but the sentiments are when he is away. He is not at the throne. He's not in Jerusalem. He is in the wilderness, and he is running for his life from someone, one of those two individuals. And they are seeking to destroy him. They're seeking to take his life. And he's heartsick over it in both situations. One is his father-in-law, the other one was his own son. And he's heartsick over all of it, and he's struggling with his relationship with God. He's struggling with his interactions with God to a certain extent in this setting, and he is crying out to the Lord and expressing things. He starts out, and David does this a lot in his Psalms. He starts out with the yearning for God's presence, and then as he is pouring out his lament to the Lord, he then comes to the middle of the psalm, or toward the end of the psalm, and he is now saying, wait a minute, I got to get my head straight. It's almost like he is saying to himself, I got to get my head straight. I got to start thinking, this is what God has actually done for me, and I need to focus on what he has done in the past. I got to focus on what he's doing in my heart and life, and I've got to get my eyes off of the circumstances. And so David, in writing this, is expressing the heart that is yearning for peace and safety and fulfillment. And then he then says, but wait a minute. It's really all about him and what he's already done for me. So that's what we see in the flavor here. And I want to look at that as we gather here together. So here is how he starts out. He says, O God, thou art my God. That phrase, as he gets started, really is expressing a yearning. It's almost a lament, a cry that's going out to the Lord. Oh Lord! He is just struggling with the circumstance of his life. And he says, you are mine. And there is, right away, he is expressing the fact that he has access directly to God in this situation. He is coming with confidence before the Lord. If you want to look at maybe an earthly example of that, it is the child who is going to the parent knowing that he is going to be received there, knowing that the parent wants to hear what the child has to say, knowing that the parent is ready to respond to the needs of the moment. You've all seen the children who they want to talk with mom and dad, and they'll walk up and they're just like, Mom, 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 Mom. And you're trying to have a conversation with someone, Mom, 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 Mom. Okay? We've all experienced that, have we not? Dad, 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 Dad. What? Okay? And at that point, they're not being well received. Okay? It's like, what do you want? Can I go to Johnny's for house for supper? Yes, leave, go! We're kind of that non-receptive kind of an attitude. But there is then in other situations where when the child comes to us, the parent is ready to shower down any kind of benefit. And you know when this is especially true? When your little one is sick. Okay? At that point, the little one, not your teenagers, because they're just trying to get out of school. Okay? But your little ones, when they're sick, Mom, can I have something to drink? Yes, what can I get you? How can I get you? What can I do? Can I serve you? How can I serve you? How can I do this? How can I make it all better? I wish I could just take it off of you and put it on myself. I would rather me be sick than you experiencing what you're experiencing. That's the heart of a parent, is it not? That's what David's expressing. David is sick. Not physically, although there probably is enough turmoil in his heart that there might be a little physical sickness there. But David is struggling. David is heartsick. David is battling in his heart and his mind. And he knows that when he goes to God, God is there as the tender, compassionate Father that he knows. And of course, with God, it's never, we're never interrupting him because of who he is and his power and his omniscience and all of those things. We're not interrupting him like a child would interrupt a parent in a conversation. God never says, can you, Jeff, can you put it on hold? I'm speaking to Tim now. But when I'm done with Tim, I'll get to you. Okay? That is not, we have a God who is infinite, and so that's not an issue. But that assurance of being able to come to him. This is a man who is struggling with weakness. And so when I talk about a renewed intimacy with God, it is his strength. It is relationship with God that needs to be renewed there in the wilderness. Let me take just a moment and talk about wilderness experiences. If you look through the Old Testament, and you look into the prophecies of the New Testament as well, you will say that when God is looking to get the attention of his people, he says he's going to take them to the wilderness when they're going to be renewed. This comes out very strongly in the book of Hosea in chapter 2. In chapter 2 of the book of Hosea, if you're familiar with the contents of the book of Hosea, it is the narrative of Hosea marrying a woman who would one day become a prostitute. And he's told before he marries her that she will do this. He marries her because God commands him to do so. And he loves her. That doesn't seem to be the problem. But she does. She goes into prostitution. She leaves home and she goes into prostitution. And God says, you are to do this, okay? She abandons her husband. She abandons her children. And she goes into prostitution to illustrate Israel's falling away from God. That he had loved her. She was his bride. He had showered down blessings upon her, and yet then she still turned to other gods and worshipped other gods. And that's what the book was about. And so Hosea's marriage was an illustration of that. And then in chapter 2, she experiences what many of those who are involved in prostitution. It wears on the body because of the degrading sin that it is. It wears out the body. It destroys the spirit. It destroys the heart. It destroys the whole person, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. It destroys the whole person. And it does not just the prostitute, but the one who goes into her. It destroys them too. The whole thing is destructive. And so this woman now has come to her, she's come to the end of her days of being a prostitute. And all the ones who came and showered her with gifts are no longer coming to her and showering her with gifts. She has gone ugly. She is showing the ravages of sin, and now her lovers, as it says in the book of Hosea, they no longer want her. And so now she's destitute. And Hosea now comes and takes his wife back, brings her back into the home, and restores her. And once again, this is a picture of what God does to the sinner. It's a tremendous picture of God's grace. But in that passage in chapter 2, he says, I will take her to the wilderness. I am going to take her to the wilderness, and I am going to love her. It's a very tender word, the Hebrew word, very tender. It is literally, it means in Hebrew literally, I am going to speak to her heart. I am going to envelop her with my love out, and he's talking about the nation of Israel out in the wilderness. He's going to take them away from everything that they had found security in, and he is going to become a husband. She will no longer call me master. He uses the word Baal. She will no longer call me master, but she will call me Ishi, husband. That restoration of the intimacy of God, intimacy with God that's going to take place. And it's going to take place in the wilderness. here is David in the wilderness. And his relationship with God is going to develop in that place. Now let me make application of that for a moment for all of us. God uses the wilderness in our lives too. Many times we come to the end of ourselves. Sometimes it's loss, sometimes it's heartache, sometimes it is just that sense of just struggling spiritually and battling. God takes us to the wilderness, and it is there. He strips away all the distractions. He strips away everything that, as the book of Hosea said, he strips away our lewdness. He strips away everything, and he just lays us bare, and then he wraps his love around us. Wilderness experiences are vital to the Christian life. They're not fun. I'm not saying, oh boy, I'm going through a wilderness experience, and that means I'm going to draw closer to God. No, wilderness experiences are not enjoyable. There's trials, there's tribulations, not all of them physical, not all of them mental. Sometimes it's emotional, sometimes it's just the overall sadness. Sometimes it's things that are hard to even put your finger on. Just a dryness that comes spiritually. This is what David is experiencing, and he is saying here, I'm in the wilderness. I'm struggling in the wilderness. And so he says here, early will I seek thee. And so here's the first point, the seeking heart. What is he seeking? He says, early I will seek thee, my soul thirsts for thee. My flesh longeth for thee in a dry and thirsty land where no water is. Now, when he talks about thirsting and hungering after God, he's not talking about physical water and physical, the physical flesh. He's not talking about those things. He's talking about from a spiritual sense. He understands he's in the wilderness, he's fleeing. If it's from Absalom, he knows it's because of the sin in his own life that the Lord promised him would happen. He also, if it's from Saul, like I said, we don't know which one it was. If it's from Saul, there is an understanding that one day David was going to be king. He'd been told that, and God had revealed that to him through Samuel. So regardless, he knows that everything in the end is going to be fine. But still, in the circumstance, at the moment, he says, I desire you. He is not saying, I desire my comfortable bed back in the palace, because in both situations, whether it was a bed in his father-in-law's palace or it was his bed in his own palace, he's not longing for the bed in the palace. He's not asking for physical comfort. He's asking for a renewed relationship with God. He's saying, you have brought me to this place, you've taken away everything except yourself. Now, come to me. I desire you more than anything else, because I'm in a dry and thirsty land where no water is. It's not saying that, David in the wilderness, he knew the wilderness well. Before he became king, and before he became Saul's son-in-law, he was a shepherd in the wilderness. He knew the wilderness. He knew how to find water. Everybody that would have been with him in either situation would have also known how to find water and where to find it. It wasn't physical water that he's talking about. It is spiritual refreshment that he desires. And folks, when we are struggling in a wilderness experience, this is first and foremost what we need. We need spiritual refreshment. But that doesn't come into our life until all of the distractions get stripped away. Till all the things that our heart gets buried into. And there are so many things of this life that our hearts get really entwined with very closely. For some, it's possessions. Okay? I've got to have the latest electronic gadget. I've got to have the biggest and best house. I've got to have the nicest and newest car. That's where some struggle, and their hearts get entwined with these things, and they desire and they pursue after the physical possessions of this life. For others, those things don't matter as much. What they care about is prestige. They care about others looking up to them, and they want to be respected, and they want to have the adulation. And there are people who scream and cry out for those things, and they'll do anything to get it. I remember the first year that American Idol came on. I was fascinated. I didn't care for it once they got to the people who could actually sing, and then it was boring. It was when they did all the tryouts of all the people who couldn't sing. That was just hilarious. And I enjoyed that immensely. And this guy came in, and you could tell he wasn't serious. And that's what made it fun. All he wanted was his moment of fame, and he got it. He came in to audition for a song dressed like Little Bo Peep. The dress, the staff, the long hair. I mean, Little Bo Peep had lost her sheep. And he came in, he stepped in front of him, and he sang, Mary Had a Little Lamb, in a monotone. One note. He didn't sing more than one note. Mary had a little, and it was awful and hilarious. And I can't even imagine anybody could sing that bad. He had to have been able to sing better than that, but he didn't even try to sing better than that, because you see, it wasn't about winning. It was about getting that time of being on TV and to say, I was on TV. Yes, you were. And your children will never speak to you again. Because you humiliated them. And your wife, if you have one, is humiliated. But it said to me, but this is what people will do just because they want to be famous in some way. And so for some, that's an issue. For others, it's just pursuit of pleasure, whatever makes me feel good at the moment. And they pursue that. Those things are dead ends. The book of Ecclesiastes, if you're not sure about those things being dead ends, read the book of Ecclesiastes. Because Solomon talks about every single one of those things, because he had all of them. There was nothing. He had all the prestige you could possibly want. He had all the power you could possibly want. He had all the money that you could possibly want. He was wise, academically gifted, if I want to put it in that phrase. I mean, the man was brilliant. Okay? He had many wives, and he had other women who weren't his wives, so he had all the physical pleasures you could have as well. And do you know what he said about them? Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. There is nothing new under the sun, and it's all empty. Just empty. There is no fulfillment in any of it. He had it all, and he found it all to be worthless. And that is the end result of all of those things. When you strip away all of those things, and it comes right down to it, you can say like Solomon did. He said, this is the end of the matter. Worship God. Worship God. Enjoy him forever. That's what it really boils down to. That's what David is saying. This is what I long for. This is the refreshment that I've got to find. He has to be our highest desire, and that's what I've been building up to with all of the things I've said to this point. He must become our highest desire. If you really want to have a successful spiritual walk with God, he must become your highest desire. How does that happen? It's the work of the Spirit in your life. Follow his commandments. Keep his commandments. Start there. Ask the Lord to deepen your relationship with him. Walk according to the Spirit of God and in his power, and the Spirit will fill you, and that desire will strengthen and grow. And it will grow to the point where if you will constantly wish to be with him in prayer as often as you can. That desire. But notice he also says, this is what he also desires. This is what the seeking heart. He wants to see thy power and thy glory, so as I have seen thee in the sanctuary. David had witnessed the glory of God in the tabernacle. The temple hadn't been built yet. That was going to be built by his son Solomon. But the tabernacle was still existing. It was out in the wilderness, the tabernacle was, and it was in a distance away in the area of Shiloh, which was part of Israel. And David would go there and would be able to worship there. And he did so as a boy. Now, later, during his king, he brought the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem, and there was worshiping that took place there. But he saw the glory of the Lord in the tabernacle as a boy, as a young man, and I think later on in life as well. He had seen the glory of the Lord in the past. He said, I desire to see that. What is he asking for? He's asking for spiritual power. He's asking for strength. Now, that was last week's message, and I'm not going to rehash last week's message. It was long enough, and we don't want to do it any longer here. So, he is asking for that strength and power in his life. Do you desire to have a spiritually powerful life? The desire of God is at the root of that. But that desire for God is then expressed by saying, I want to see your presence. I want to dwell in your presence. I want to see your power around me. I want to experience all these things. Once again, he's not asking for comfort. He's not asking for a restoration of wealth. He's not asking for any of these things. He says, all these other things are gone. I just want you. So, that's the seeking heart. Let's go on. And in verse 3, we're going to see the settled heart. The settled heart now begins to shift its gaze away from the circumstances of the moment and begins to focus its attention and centers its attention on God himself. Verse 3, because thy loving kindness is better than life, my lips shall praise thee, thus will I bless thee while I live. I will lift up my hands in thy name. He's saying, I'm going to worship you because of your loving kindness. Let me take just a moment to explain that word. Loving kindness is the word, it was the Hebrew way of expressing what we call in the New Testament grace. Okay? Unmerited favor. And the word that is, the Hebrew word that is translated loving kindness here, when you look at the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, that's referred to as the Septuagint. Back in the intertestamental period between the book of Malachi, before the New Testament starts and the Old Testament ends, there's 400 years in that time period. And in that 400 years, the Hebrew Bible is put into Greek, is translated into Greek. And we refer to it today as the Septuagint. And it was the common Bible of the day. We know that Jesus quoted from it once or twice, pretty extensively, although generally Jesus spoke Aramaic. But he quotes from the Septuagint, the Greek translation, on a couple of occasions because it comes out word for word in the translation, and it's a little different than the Old Testament that we have to a certain extent. But the Septuagint is helpful in the sense that we can sometimes understand what a term means in the Hebrew as they understood it, and it's the same word that the New Testament calls grace. Is this word loving kindness? So what is loving kindness? It is unmerited favor. Here is David, he's saying, I'm going through a tough time, but I also am going to praise you because everything that I have, everything that I've ever had is because of your favor in my life. Put another way, what do you have that you have not received? You have a good job? Who gave you the ability to do that job? Who provided you that job? You say, well, I have beautiful children. Who gave them to you? God did. You say you're comfortable financially. Who gave you that? God did. Whatever it is, everything you have, whatever abilities that you have, and we all have different ones, whatever they are, you have them because God gave them to you. And that is a sign of his grace in life. Now, ultimately, grace is found in the salvation that we have in Jesus Christ. David's not reflecting on that as much as he is all of the blessings that he's experienced in his life. He just looks at it and says, there is nothing I have, nothing I am, that I don't owe you all the praise and the glory for. That's a heart attitude. It teaches one basic grace in our lives. Gratitude. Thankfulness to God for all that he has given to us. So here is David in the middle of the wilderness running for his life. And what is his reflection? Oh, God, you're so good to me. That's essentially what he's saying. Even in the midst of these circumstances, I am going to worship you. Why? You are just so good to me. You've given me so much. More than I could ever have dreamt possible. You have given them to me. I ask for no more. Give me you. And I ask for nothing more. But whatever comes into my life will be because of your grace, and I am going to shower my praise upon you because of my great gratitude. Because you are worthy of praise for all that you have done for me. there is grace. Then notice what he says here. My soul shall be satisfied as with marrow and fatness, and my mouth shall praise thee with joyful lips. Because thou hast been my help, therefore in the shadow of thy wings will I rejoice. Two things that are here will end very quickly or relatively soon here. He says, I'm satisfied. I'm satisfied. He talks about his marrow and fatness. Here he is in the wilderness running for his life, and he said, my life is filled with marrow and fatness. Now, when we talk about marrow and fatness, that is an expression that indicates plenty. Okay, the food that we have today, we stay away from fats. Well, they say we should anyway. I have a tendency not to. We stay away from these things, stay away from fats. But in that day, they didn't have the kind of foods that we have today. To have some fat in your food was a luxury because it enabled you to survive. Our bodies need fat to a certain extent. Maybe not to the extent that we consume it, but we need it to a certain extent. And the fatness indicates that it's God's provision. It's his nourishment. And marrow is that which brought in protein. It was the idea, and it wasn't so much that the humans ate the bone marrow per se, but the animals in the field do. And they would eat, in the bones, the marrow would be there. And that is where the life is. That's where all the protein is. That's where all of the nutrients that they needed to survive. This is David's way of saying, you nourish me. Now, I don't know that he's talking about food per se, because if he was, I think he would use different phraseology. What he's talking about is that in his spiritual walk with God, he is saying, you bring me great satisfaction. Life is good. So here's a man who's struggling and fighting through, and yet he's saying, my life is good. It can't get any better than this. Well, obviously, we look at it and say, yes, it can. You could be back in the palace with all your servants and all that. Yes, life could be better than that. It probably could be worse too, but it could definitely be better. But that's not what David is focusing in on. He's saying he said, my life is wonderful. My life is wonderful. I wouldn't ask for anything more than whatever you dole out to me. When a person can say that with honesty before God and has that supremely in their heart and mind, they earn the greatest, they receive the greatest gift of all. Godliness with contentment. Godliness with contentment. There is no greater gift in the world that can be given to a mortal being than godliness with contentment. Walk with God and just be enjoying everything that he bestows upon you. And Paul says this to Timothy in 1 Timothy. He said, bodily exercise is profiteth some, but godliness with contentment is great gain. It's everything. That's what David is expressing. I have you, and I'm able to fellowship with you. I'm able to pray to you. I'm able to revel in your presence, and you meet my needs. Every need I have, you meet. I ask for nothing more. You are my supply. You are my provision. I have need for nothing more than you. Can you see now why God said he's a man after my own heart? He wasn't perfect. He was a great sinner. And yet he was a man who pursued God and was a man after God's own heart. What an example that is to all of us. Finally, he says here, therefore in the shadow of thy wings will I rejoice. My soul followed hard after thee. Thy right hand upholdeth me. Protection. Protection. It goes back to a message that we looked at in Psalm 27, also a Psalm of David, where it says basically the same thing. The Lord is my strength and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? He said, I have nothing to fear. Notice here at the beginning, O Lord. Oh my God, I am struggling. Oh God, thou art my God, I am struggling. come to me, meet my need, but oh, how you have done so. And there are those who are following after me, the last two verses, there are those who are following after me to take my life. They are insignificant. They don't matter. As long as I have you and all of the blessings that you bestow upon me, I am refreshed and I am strengthened. I'm in the wilderness, but I'm being renewed. If we are going to live lives that are going to deal with all of the challenges of the day, we must learn to be what David is here. We must pursue godliness and then recognize the contentment that comes with that. And that is where our lives should be centered and must be centered. Renew our intimacy with God. Draw nigh unto him. He will draw nigh unto you. If you're saying, I just feel so distant from the Lord, he doesn't move. He is always there. He is waiting for you. His great grace says it. He's waiting for you. He's ready to welcome you with open arms. Remember the parable of the prodigal son? He's there. He wants that intimacy with you. He desires it. He has made provision for it. Just go to him. Humbly recognize that you aren't where you know you need to be and want to be. Ask him to nurture your soul and to bring you that contentment. Let him work in your life to the point where he is the center of it. And this intimacy can be yours. And when it is, life becomes truly life. And there's no more fear of anything that could come your way. This is the blessing of intimacy with God. And those who have found it are truly blessed indeed. Let's pray. Father in heaven, thank you for the time together. Lord, I just would pray that you would just guide and direct our thinking in the time that we have on these things. Lord, I pray that you would refresh our hearts, refresh our minds, restore our souls. Lord, help us to recognize our great need for these things. Lord, I just would pray that you would just guide and direct us in our lives and bring these things continually to our remembrance. Father, may we pursue after you above all other things in this life. And we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Tim is coming. Let me just mention.